Last week, Wisconsin voters elected Democrats governor and attorney general, gave a Democratic U.S. senator a new term, but kept Republicans in control of the Assembly and Senate, kept the Republican majority in our U.S. House delegation at 5-3. To talk about these decisions, thanks to my fellow Capitol reporters to my left, Shawn Johnson, Capitol Bureau Chief, Wisconsin Public Radio, Molly Beck, Capitol reporter, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Scott Bauer, Capitol Correspondent, The Associated Press, Bob Hague, News Director, Wisconsin Radio Network. Well, we've had 6 days to think about all the fascinating election. Let's start with governor. Molly, take the lead on that. We're going to have a new governor. Thoughts on that? Why?
It was a dramatic finish to that race. It was a hard-fought race. I think that the enthusiasm was on the Democratic side. The turnout in Dane County and Milwaukee County pushed them over the edge. And I think, one thing that a lot of people have brought up about why Democrats were successful this time in defeating Scott Walker is maybe his, the difficulty of running for a third term. Okay,
because it was perceived, as Professor Sabato said of Virginia, as a fourth term.
Right.
Yeah, given that. Well, was a question for the whole panel. Do you think Trump's shadow cost Walker 31,000 votes? Anybody?
Definitely didn't hurt him or help him any. His numbers were softer in the WOW counties than they needed to be for him to win. That's definitely, I think a lot of people would say that's a Trump factor. The higher Democratic turnout that Molly mentioned is definitely some Trump factor there. The map for where Walker needed to do well, he didn't hit the targets he needed to hit, and Democrats exceeded what they needed to do. And Evers still only won by 1.15% or whatever it is. So
49.4 to 48.6 or something. Am I in the ballpark there?
The president was critical last week of House Republicans who lost their races because, as he saw it, they didn't embrace him closely enough. Well, Governor Walker clearly embraced the president closely with the trip to central Wisconsin in the days leading up to the election. And I think, like Scott said, it's possible that sort of rubbed some folks the wrong way.
But, Shawn, there were times when the governor was asked about the latest initiative or order or tweets by the president, and the governor said that's a federal issue. He didn't even touch it, did he?
He did not, no. Well, I mean, he was trying to keep his distance from the controversial stuff, but, I mean, I agree. He didn't distance himself from Trump in this campaign in the way that I thought we maybe thought he might a year ago. Just didn't happen. And I do think that, I think Trump motivated Democrats to get out. And I also, I think Walker's numbers being a little soft in southeast Wisconsin are reflective of what we said in 2016, that Trump has some troubles in suburban areas with Republican voters. That happened last week. You even saw the closest race for the state Senate was in a suburban seat of all seats, so I think that's a real phenomenon going forward.
Well, as Molly alluded to, the Dane County turnout 3-1 for Evers, Milwaukee County 2-1. Now let's back up to April, when Dane County voters cast more votes for Rebecca Dallett than Milwaukee. So my question is, did Lieutenant Governor-elect Barnes, do you think he was a factor in the Milwaukee County turnout? Anybody?
I think he probably was a factor. I think there was a lot of smaller organizations just devoted to getting to boost turnout in areas of Milwaukee that had seen it drop off considerably, especially in the 2016 race. So I think that, coupled with the enthusiasm that Democrats had, because of Trump or other reasons, I think that did help, though.
Do you think suburban Republicans were still mad at Walker for his 71-day presidential bid in 2015, Scott?
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I think there's certainly a fatigue there among some voters where, as you mentioned, it was his fourth time on the ballot in 8 years, right? So he won in 2010, he won in the recall in 2012, and he won in the re-election in 2014. Here he is again. I think a lot of voters, not just in Wisconsin, but in other places where there are not term limits on governor, feel like 2 terms is enough. Let's give the other guy a shot. And mixed in with all this other stuff we're talking about, the Trump fatigue, the presidential run, everything that's kind of gone on can affect whether somebody's going to turn out or not. and they may just feel like, not super motivated this time around.
Well, next step for Governor-elect Evers, he's going to name a transition team. Have you anybody heard any names about who might chair that? I have not. Anybody?
They've been super quiet about their transition plans so far, and maybe by the time this taping's over, we'll have some more details. But tomorrow, the Joint Finance Committee the legislature's budget committee is meeting to appropriate a budget for the transition team. So maybe we'll get some details around that time or before, but nothing official has come out yet.
Well, all of us here have asked for an exit interview with Governor Walker. He's not been seen. Any predictions on when and where we might next see him? The Christmas tree lighting or something? Any thoughts on why he's not been around publicly?
There are some measures that Speaker Voss and Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald have talked about in recent days about what they want to do in the lame duck session, and I think he will at least need to respond to that about what they want to do. So far, he has not responded to whether or not he would approve some of the things they're talking about, but at least in that way, I think we'll hear from him.
Okay, and final question before we talk about LegGov relations. Do you think Governor Walker can make a political comeback, or at 51, not so much? Any thoughts?
He's 51. When Jim Doyle left office, he was 65. Tommy was in his late 50s, but he went on to serve as HHS secretary and then came back and ran for U.S. Senate a number of years after that. I don't think you can rule anything out for Scott Walker right now. I think that is an interesting question. What does he do next at such a young age and after a loss and not leaving on his own terms? So I would definitely not be surprised to see him back playing an active role in Wisconsin politics.
Well, if you're President Trump, you're thinking in terms of, again, carrying Wisconsin in 2022. What's the best position that Scott Walker could be in to help Mr. Trump carry Wisconsin again in 4 years? Bob Hague, your thoughts?
2 years.
Wow.
2 years. Thanks, Scott, for the correction. 2 years.
I hadn't really thought of that, but I suppose not too dissimilar to the role, to the way he interacted with the president in this midterm. Even though he'll be out of elected office, I think if you're the president, you're going to want Scott and Walker front and center on any visits that you make here to the state.
Any thoughts on that, Shawn? In PSs?
Well, I mean,
And the presidential election is in 2020. Thanks for the correction.
Thank you.
2 years.
He has the luxury of deciding whether or not to jump in on that one or sit it out. As a candidate for governor, he kind of had no choice, I think, is the conclusion he made. He may make a different conclusion if he wants to get back into politics and say, I don't know, 2022, if Ron Johnson were to, hold true to that, I'm not going to run for another term pledge, could be an opening for somebody like Scott Walker then.
Right. Okay, let's talk now to the ledge. No Republican incumbent lost, which I find absolutely fascinating. And we have seen now Speaker Voss offering different comments on his potential relationship with Governor Evers, and Senator Fitzgerald, I think, was more measured. Scott, Governor-elect Evers and legislative relations, your thoughts?
That's fascinating, right? I mean, Evers is walking into a larger majority in the Senate. Republicans will be 19-14 in the Senate. The Assembly, they'll be down 1 seat, but they'll still have a huge 63 to 36. Majority. Not enough for a veto override, which is very important. So you have this dynamic of Democratic governor attempting to set the agenda, has to get bills through the legislature. Legislature knows that whatever it passes has to have Evers' approval because they don't have enough votes without Democrats coming on board to override any veto. That said, you now have the Republicans talking about this lame duck session where they want to kind of enshrine a number of things in law or make some changes that could handicap the incoming governor's ability to lead in the way that Scott Walker has the past 8 years. They've been very vague about what they want to do. They've said different things at different times. It's not clear to me at all what exactly they intend to do when they come back for this lame duck session. So I think that's one issue, and then going forward, it's how do these guys all work together and what, if anything, gets done over the next 2 years at least.
Well, Senate Majority Leader Fitzgerald said he's most worried about WEDC. Now, is that a signal that they think the governor, they gave Walker too many seats on the WEDC board and they're going to pare that back? Help me parse what Senator Fitzgerald said about the WEDC membership.
I think part of it is also Tony Evers has said he wants to get rid of Weedick. So
Not going to happen, given the dynamics of what's. Excuse me, Molly. But
But I think that's, part of that discussion, and I think they might look at, giving, the executive a certain number of seats and, the legislature a certain number of seats and just reconstituting how the makeup is.
well, didn't Voss also say maybe we gave Governor Walker too much power in terms of agency rules? Shawn, were you or Bob at that press conference? Do you remember?
No, but I did hear that statement, and I thought that was interesting, but if perhaps not really very enlightening, because the agency rulemaking process is sufficiently complicated that I'm not sure what sort of tweaks that they would be looking at that would really I don't know enough about the agency rulemaking process to figure out how you rein in the governor there.
But didn't they say that no agency could promulgate a rule unless the governor had signed off on it? Wasn't that one of the changes from 2011?
Yeah,
And couldn't they skin
the
that?
Reins Act.
I'm sorry, Molly?
And the Reins Act.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
but again, they've talked about so many different, in the span of 4 days, we've had Speaker Voss say a number of different things about what would be and would not be in
And
play.
granola eating Dane County voters. Yes, go
Right,
ahead.
and the same thing with Majority Leader Fitzgerald, where he came out and talked to the press and said, we're not going to mess with the UW board. We're only looking at board, primarily we're looking at appointments to boards, what does that mean? Does that mean that the Senate's going to have to confirm everybody that comes through? Because if they do some kind of, expanded Senate confirmation process for gubernatorial appointees that maybe goes beyond what exists currently, that could really handcuff the governor if everybody he wants to put into position has to get confirmed by the Senate, who doesn't already have to get confirmed. There's a number of things that could happen that you've seen in North Carolina where some things got challenged in court, some things went to referendum with voters. So I don't know if we can fully comprehend what they intend to do yet, because they haven't really been that specific.
Well,
Scott pointed out what happened in North Carolina and the fact that some of that went to court, some of it went to referendum. If that is how this plays out here, then that doesn't seem to bode well for a governor and a legislature really working effectively together to get things done, if there's this sideshow.
well, Shawn, take the longer lens and talk about what Bob just alluded to. How do you see Democratic Governor Evers interacting with Voss and Fitzgerald on K-12, highway funding, and health care?
So I would think on most issues, they just won't work together. Like the governor will introduce stuff knowing that it's going to go nowhere in the legislature. They'll pass bills knowing that he's going to veto them. I think there will just be a lot of that. If it's in the budget, there is potentially room for common ground when it comes to those things. So Evers talked about increasing education funding. At the end of the campaign, Walker was talking about 2/3 education funding. All that, we'll have to see what it looks like in the light of revenue estimates in a few months and everything like that. But I think if it's in the budget, a bill that they sort of have accepted that they have to pass, there's room for compromise. So did you mention transportation in that, though?
If I didn't, but go ahead.
That's the one that's interesting to me, because what Evers was talking about with everything's on the table is very similar to what Speaker Voss has been talking about when it comes to funding transportation. But I'm not sure that just because Evers is in the governor's office and not Governor Walker, that you'll have any deals struck there, because the Senate is still the Senate. And in fact, I watched your interview with Andre Jacques to see kind of where he was at on transportation. And he sounds like he's part of that, he's kind of like part of that Steve Nass, Stevie Strobel, Chris Kappenga caucus maybe that held things up last session.
Right. Molly, you were going to say?
Well, on the budgeting, Senator Fitzgerald just last week said that he expects to just go off of base budgeting with Governor Evers, and which means that whatever budget that Governor Evers produces, they're just going to ignore if that's what they end up doing. So we'll see if they actually work together.
Let's play that out. Governor Evers asked to expand Medicaid, pick up to provide health care for more of those above the poverty level. And where's the middle ground on that, potentially? So he puts that in his budget. Then go back to what Molly said. The Republicans operate from the current base year budget plus. So theoretically ignoring that, is there a potential common ground on expanding Medicaid, Scott?
I don't know, because don't forget the legislature changed the law to require their approval for the state to take that money. So Evers, prior to that, could have just accepted it and it would have been over. But now it has to go through the legislature. You know, and Speaker Voss has said, he said at the WisPolitics lunch, there's no way that's going to happen. There's no way they're going to accept that federal Medicaid money. So if Governor Evers anticipates that money and puts it into his budget and spends it, the legislature, like Molly referenced, you know, they'll probably start from where we are now as opposed to starting from what Evers wants and trying to fill in the gaps of what they don't want to do.
Well, I want to talk about the two statements that our candidates for governor made in the final hours of the campaign. Evers told the Washington Post, "I don't intend to raise taxes," point one. Point two, Governor Walker said, "I want to codify, put in Wisconsin law, the ACA language on no pre-existing conditions." Well, first of all, do you think Governor Evers can get away with, remember he said, "I don't plan to raise taxes"? Because when you talk about limiting the manufacturing and ag, that can be interpreted as a tax increase. So let's talk about, were you surprised at Mr. Evers telling the Post and then following it up in Wisconsin, "I don't intend to raise taxes"? Bob?
Yeah, well, I was surprised. Perhaps there's a little semantics there that works in Tony Evers' favor. He did say, "I don't plan on raising taxes." Well, plans can change given the circumstances that he's going to have to be dealing with.
Okay. And then pre-existing conditions, Mr. Voss said that's a top priority for the lame duck session. But is he asking then the Senate to vote on the Assembly passed bill? Or he's not saying let's
wants the
codify
Assembly
what's
bill.
in the ACA?
He wants the Assembly bill.
Do you
He
see
said
the
that
Senate
last week.
doing that?
I mean, so far, and still just a couple days ago, Senator Fitzgerald said there's still some members of his caucus that are not comfortable with that bill, which is why they didn't pass it before. So it doesn't seem like anything's changed. She hasn't said who those members are, but it doesn't. They're talking about wanting to do something, but it doesn't. I don't see a lot of movement on it.
And we're looking at a public hearing on the Kimberly-Clark tax breaks. Do you see a vote coming on that, Shawn?
I'm sort of watching that, I guess, as an interested speculator. You know, what changed in what happened last week that changes the votes in that caucus. I don't know if you guys have more input on that than, but I'm just curious what changed because the group of people who were there isn't that much different.
Well, it just looks to me like you need, 5 or 6 Democrats for that to pass? And Schilling's position going into Tuesday's election was, no, we need a broader tax bill, tax help for the industry, not just Kimberly-Clark.
And Senator Erpenbach said on Friday that he doesn't think anybody in that caucus would vote for the legislation that they're looking at. And Senator Fitzgerald also said last week that he still needs to talk to Senator Schilling about Democratic votes. So it seems like we're at the same place that we have been for a long time.
And think about the timing of this too. They want to come in and do that. So if they come in and do Kimberly-Clark at all, it would be the end of November, according to Majority Leader Fitzgerald. So he's going to be asking Democrats to come on board and help him pass that bill. A week before, he's going to come in and do a bunch of stuff to limit the incoming Democratic governor's power.
That's
I mean,
good
how are
point.
Democratic senators going to feel about cutting him a deal on a Kimberly-Clark bill, knowing that in a few days he's going to potentially do something that they're really going to be opposed to? So that's if it's a bargaining chip at all, the Kimberly-Clark bill, as everyone said, is not really anywhere new today as where it was before the election.
It also spends, $105 million over 15 years, $7 million a year. Shawn, let's turn the corner. Let's talk about the U.S. Senate election. Senator Baldwin won 55-45, rather large margin. Your thoughts? Do you want to open the discussion on her victory?
I guess it's taken such a backseat to the governor's race because, I mean, a close governor's race is, just kind of by definition an interesting story. But it's a pretty big, I guess we'd call that a blowout at that point for Tammy Baldwin. I mean, if you'd looked at this race a few years ago, you might have thought a Democrat up in a midterm election, turnout's going to be lower for Tammy Baldwin. She could be in trouble. And I think you saw a lot of outside money coming into this race well in advance of the election, trying to bring down her approval rating. It didn't turn out that way. She had a great election. I think she did kind of set the tone for this thing. Also, I don't get the sense that Leah Vukmir emerged from her primary particularly strongly. That was a tough primary, and never get the sense that her race was close with Baldwin's.
Do you see parallels, Shawn, in the Senator Baldwin's victory over Tommy Thompson when she said he's not for you anymore? And then Senator Baldwin put a pediatric care nurse on the defensive on health care. I mean, so my point is, did Senator Baldwin's campaign define both candidates, Tommy in 2012 and Senator Rootmere this time, before they could play offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. Tammy Baldwin, Senator Baldwin, has a knack for kind of finding that message and sticking to it, you know, from start to finish. I don't think she ever wavered from that. And so that was, you know, she definitely defined Tommy Thompson in 2012 at a time when he couldn't kind of hit back with any advertising money. It was a different situation this time, but what she was saying about Leah Vukmir early in that campaign is very similar to what she was saying at the end.
Anybody else on the campaign themes that Senator Vukmir adopted that didn't work? Bob?
Well, I mean, if we could circle back to the president here, I think there was a Trump factor in this race as well, and that is that Leah Vukmir associated herself early on very closely with the president. Build that wall. I mean, she was 100% all in with the president. Now, if you're a suburban Milwaukee voter who's a little uncomfortable with the president's tone, you might have seen Leah Vukmir, you know, hand you a reason not to vote for her there.
Any PSs on U.S. Senate campaign?
Just interesting, as you were talking about the Tommy race, where the painting of him as he's not for you anymore is very similar to what the Evers campaign painted Walker as. He's out for himself. He's running for president. He doesn't care about you guys in the state. Seems like it's a good message if you're running for office to have against your opponent.
Right. Okay. Let's turn to the U.S. House. You moderated a First District congressional?
I did, in Janesville.
Right.
Yeah.
And, okay, Mr. Stile got 55%.
That was actually, because I checked last night, that was actually the closest margin in any of the House races.
Yes.
None of the rest of them were even within shouting distance of that.
Gwen Moore 74%. Actually, Grothman 56%. So
okay,
it's close.
all right. There's a
Go
couple
ahead.
of points. Yeah,
But
to my point, I think that's just indicative of how the rest of the districts, you know, really are safe for incumbents. And maybe the first CD is the one that's a little on the bubble there.
Bob, how come Grothman handily beat Mr. Cole? Because that was the one that at one point Democrats in Washington, the Team Pelosi had targeted.
The simple answer is that's because that's been a safely Republican district since the 1960s. So, you know, I think there was a lot of enthusiasm for Democrats in that race that just didn't really reflect the reality on the ground.
Well, Duffy 60%, Gallagher 66%. Were any of you surprised that we kept the 5-3 margin in terms of the GOP? No?
No.
Well, go back to the first
Okay,
CD.
well, so
how come Mr. Bryce?
So Randy Bryce got in this
he was a
race
flavor of the month a year ago, a favorite of Democrats nationally.
well before Paul Ryan had made his decision that he wasn't going to run again. So Randy Bryce had positioned himself from the get-go as the guy who was going to topple the giant, right? I'm here for
the
you.
Bernie Sanders populist.
Right, exactly.
Okay, the Iron Stash.
And then I think really when Speaker Ryan said I'm not running again, it kind of took a lot of the wind out of Randy Bryce's sails. And Brian Stile, the eventual Republican candidate, played things pretty close to the vest during his campaign. It was not what you would call high profile, and I think there was an understanding there with the Stile campaign that if you just kind of play it cool here, things are going to work out in your favor.
Okay. Any other PSs on our House votes, Molly? Please.
On top of that, in the first, I mean, on top of Paul Ryan deciding not to run again, Randy Bryce also had issues with pastoress and not paying child support, and that might have, you know, helped to get Brian Stile over.
He did have, there was a cat call at the debate I moderated about the child support issue. Yeah, it was a interesting, I would almost say sort of raucous event at in Janesville.
Okay, I want to take the lead on the Attorney General. And here's what most intrigues me. The September Charles Franklin poll, 81%, either did not know or did not know enough to have an opinion of Josh Kaul, our Attorney General-elect. What happened in 2 months? Or am I asking the wrong question? Was it Democrats who voted for Baldwin, then Evers, and then Kaul? I was just astonished that you can be Attorney General 2 months after 81% say you don't. Help me understand this.
Do you talk to a lot of people who aren't as involved in this as we are, Steve? Because
Maybe I need a...
I mean, just personally, when I touch base with family members around the state, I don't want to say there's a level of indifference. There's just a level of not knowing. I had a couple of close family members who were calling Tony Evers up to 3 weeks before the election. So, there's a lot of people who have a lot of other things going on in their lives, and they just don't tune in until it gets very close.
Well, okay, but did the Kaul ad, this is a coin, this is a rape kit, was that pretty effective? Because Mr. Schimmel had to answer that late. Did you think that was effective?
Did more people see that ad, or did they see the ads from the outside groups that had a lot more money in this race and were pretty vicious? When you talk about the Republican Attorney General's ads versus the Democratic Attorney General's ads, maybe more people saw those. I don't know if the coin put it over the top for Josh Kaul. I mean, my best guess is that, yes, as you get closer to election, Democrats are going to be more inclined to vote for the Democratic candidate.
Well, right. I mean, ads notwithstanding, if you've already decided you're in for Evers and Tammy Baldwin, right?
So there's no drop-off. Well, don't we still have a potential? Mr. Schimmel has said, I'm going to wait for the official canvass. That might well fall within the 1%. We might see a recount there, correct?
Yeah, right now it's within the 1%. He all but conceded. He said it appears that Josh Kaul won, but we'll see what happens after the canvass.
Do you look for Mr. Kaul and Mr. Evers to work pretty well, hand in glove? The first thing they're going to do is withdraw from the ACA Texas lawsuit. Mr. Kaul's got quite a learning curve. He's only been in the state 4 years, and that agency has, I think, 680 employees and a budget of $144 million. He's got a steep learning curve, don't you think?
The first things that Josh Kaul said he wanted to do were related to gun restrictions, like universal background checks and bump stock bans and a red flag law. Obviously, the legislature is going to have to be involved in something like that. So maybe on those issues, which Tony Evers has also said he supports, maybe they'll work together on those too.
Wow, what an election. Okay, let's end it this way. Biggest surprise, you guys were all out on the campaign trail. Biggest surprise last Tuesday's election, Mr. Hague.
I've got to go with the governor's race.
Do you?
I really do. When people asked me, to level with them and say what I thought, I told them I thought Governor Walker was going to pull it off. So for me, that was the big surprise.
Scott.
I think for me, it's the Republicans gaining a seat in the Senate and only losing one in the Assembly. I think I thought that they were more vulnerable in the Senate. Didn't know if the Democrats would get a majority or not, and thought they might lose a couple here and there in the Assembly. So the fact that they basically held steady was a surprise to me.
Quick follow-up. What about the Fair Elections press release saying that in the Assembly races, Republicans got 45% of the race, of the votes, yet they will have 63 seats? Do you think redistricting played the decisive role that people like fair elections say?
I mean, it's definitely an argument that you're going to hear from that side for a long time, because it's going to be a part of their lawsuit that's pending in federal court right now on redistricting. So, whether it was the deciding factor or not, I don't know, but it certainly adds to the data that they're arguing in federal court about to try to prove their point.
Molly, biggest surprise?
Not to copy Bob, but the governor's race, and I don't know if it was a surprise, but it was the most dramatic, thing of the election. That a lot of the polling showed Evers ahead, but the Marquette Law School poll, for example, obviously was the most accurate. So it was interesting to be there that night, watching the totals seesaw back and forth in each other's favor. So.
Shawn.
I guess for me, the turnout margins in the strongly Democratic counties versus the strongly Republican counties.
2.67 million votes.
Just looking at like Dane County in particular, for Tony Evers to win that county by 150,000 votes, Tom Barrett won that county by 81,000 votes, and I'm sure back then we all thought that was a big margin. So Dane County has become a powerhouse in state politics if it wasn't already. You're just seeing a lot of
City of
growth
Madison
there.
turnout 92%. Do I have that right? Excuse me for interrupting.
No, it's fine.
Is that right? City of Madison?
It was high. Yeah.
All right, I thought it was 87,
Okay.
86,
but
somewhere in there,
the
yeah.
point is that Scott said it
Yeah.
was high. I'm going to take the election of a Democratic Attorney General. I just didn't see him closing that gap. But what do I know? What do we know? Cap Roundtable, I want to thank Shawn Johnson, Molly Beck, Scott Bauer, Bob Hague. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you.